I saw that woman with another man, a little girl told a millionaire. Then she pulls him aside and does something incredible. Comment telling me what you thought of this story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and let me know what city you're watching from. I really want to know if you like my story and get to know you better, so subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The Tuesday sun beat down hard on the Willow Creek Municipal Cemetery as Daniel Harrison, 42, stood before the white marble tomb he had religiously visited every week for 3 years. His fingers traced the cold surface of the headstone where Isabella Harrison, beloved wife, was engraved, a routine that had become his only way of keeping alive what was left of his marriage. Daniel adjusted the tie of his dark grey suit, the same one he had worn to the funeral, and placed the red roses he had brought from the downtown flower shop. His steelworks, one of the largest in Willow Creek, continued to thrive under his management, but professional success did not fill the void he carried in his chest since that terrible night he received the call about the accident. "Another week, Bella," he murmured to the stone, as if she could hear him. "The company is doing well, but you know how hard it is for me to be alone in that big house." A soft sob interrupted his thoughts. Daniel turned and saw a small girl, apparently about 4 years old, sitting among the nearby trees. Her brown hair was messy, her simple clothes dirty with earth, and tears streamed down her rosy cheeks as she looked at something in her hands. "Hey, little one," Daniel said, approaching cautiously. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The girl lifted her large brown eyes, and Daniel felt a pang in his heart to see so much sadness in such a young face. She was holding a crumpled photograph, clearly old, that looked like it had been handled a lot. "Mister, do you know the lady in this photo?" she asked with a trembling voice, holding the picture out to Daniel. When he took the photograph, he almost dropped it. It was a picture of Isabella, his Isabella, smiling in a square he didn't recognize, wearing a dress he had never seen. But what shocked him most was that the photo seemed recent, far too recent to have been taken before his wife's passing. Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I saw the lady from the photo yesterday," the girl replied, wiping her nose on her sleeve. "She was walking hand in hand with an old man in the town center. They looked happy." Daniel's world stopped. His knees almost buckled as he looked at the photograph again, searching for any sign that this was a cruel coincidence. But there was no doubt it was Isabella, his wife, who had been buried 3 years ago after a car accident that had completely destroyed the vehicle. "Are you sure it was her?" he managed to ask, his mind trying to process the impossible information. The girl nodded vigorously. "Yes, I'm sure. She gave me a piece of bread when I was hungry near the square. She was very kind to me." Daniel sat down on a nearby bench, the photograph trembling in his hands. How was it possible? He himself had identified the body at the county morgue, although the face was badly injured from the accident. The authorities had confirmed it through the documents found in her purse and the jewelry she was wearing. "What's your name, little one?" he asked, trying to keep his composure. "Emily," she replied, moving closer. "And you? Why did the photo make you sad?" "I'm Daniel, and the lady in the photo was my wife." Emily tilted her head, confused. "Was? But she's alive. I talked to her yesterday." The child's words echoed in Daniel's mind like a disturbing echo. If Emily was right, if it really was Isabella she had seen, it meant his wife was alive and he had buried a stranger. But it also meant that Isabella had voluntarily disappeared from his life, allowing him to believe she was dead. "Emily, can you show me where you saw this lady?" he asked, standing up with determination. The girl nodded and took his hand with her small dirty one. "I can. She always shows up at the square around 3 o'clock, but why do you want to find her if she was your wife?" Daniel didn't know how to answer such an innocent question that carried so much complexity. How could he explain to a 4-year-old child that his entire life might be based on a monumental lie? As they walked through the streets of Willow Creek, Daniel observed Emily more closely. Her clothes were old and ill-fitting, her shoes had holes, and there was a deep sadness in her eyes that no child should carry. "Where do you live, Emily?" "I live on the street," she answered naturally, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "My mum left me here a long time ago and didn't come back." Daniel's heart broke hearing that. An abandoned child, alone on the streets of his city, while he lamented in his empty mansion. The irony of the situation was not lost on him. Perhaps this lost girl was exactly what he needed to find his lost wife. As they approached the town centre, Daniel felt his heart racing. Part of him hoped it was all a mistake, that Emily had confused a stranger with Isabella. But another part, a part he tried to suppress, trembled with the possibility that his wife was really alive and that his pain of the last 3 years had been completely unnecessary. The town square of Willow Creek was bustling that Tuesday afternoon. Daniel held Emily's hand tightly as his eyes scanned every face, every female silhouette that passed. His heart beat erratically, alternating between hope and terror at the possibility of finding Isabella alive. "There!" Emily exclaimed suddenly, pointing to a bench near the fountain. "It's her, the lady from the photo." Daniel followed the direction of the girl's small finger and felt his legs grow weak. Sitting on the bench, talking animatedly with an elderly man with grey hair, was a woman who was the exact image of his wife, the same wavy brown hair, the same delicate profile, the same graceful gestures he knew so well. "Isabella," he whispered, almost breathless. The woman wore a simple blue cotton dress, very different from the elegant clothes Isabella used to wear when they were married. Her hands gestured as she spoke, and she smiled in a way Daniel hadn't seen in years, a genuine, carefree smile. "Should we go talk to her?" Emily asked, already pulling Daniel toward the bench. "Wait," he said, paralyzed by emotion. How should he approach the woman he believed to be buried? What could he say to someone who had left his life in such a traumatic way? At that moment, the woman looked up, and her gaze met Daniel's across the square. For an instant she seemed confused, as if trying to remember where she knew him from. Then, to his complete shock, she gave a shy wave in their direction. "She saw us," Emily said, waving back enthusiastically. "I'll go call her." Before Daniel could stop her, the girl ran toward the bench, shouting, "Miss! Miss from the photo! I brought someone who wanted to meet you." The woman stood up gracefully and walked to meet Emily, her smile widening as she saw the child. The elderly man accompanied her, maintaining a protective posture that did not go unnoticed by Daniel. "Hi, little one," the woman said, crouching to be at Emily's level. "How are you today? Did you get something to eat?" The voice. It was exactly Isabella's voice, with the same melodic tone that used to calm Daniel after difficult days at work. But there was something different in the way she spoke, a naturalness that Isabella had never shown with children during their marriage. "I did. And look, I brought this mister here," Emily said, pulling Daniel by the hand. "He said you were his wife." The woman's expression changed instantly. Her eyes widened, and she looked at Daniel with a mixture of confusion and something that seemed like fear. "Wife?" she repeated, her voice wavering. "Isabella," Daniel said, approaching slowly, as if she were a frightened animal that might run away at any moment. "It's me, Daniel, your husband." The woman frowned and looked at the elderly man beside her, seeking some kind of guidance. "Thomas," she said, "this man is saying I'm his wife, but I don't remember having a husband." The man named Thomas, whom Daniel estimated to be about 67, stepped forward protectively. "I'm sorry, sir, but there must be some mistake. Lucy has been living with me for almost 2 years and has never mentioned having a husband. Lucy? Daniel repeated, feeling as if he'd been punched in the gut. No, her name is Isabella, Isabella Harrison. We've been married for 8 years. The woman, Isabella, shook her head slowly. I'm sorry, but I think you're confusing me with someone else. My name is Lucy, and I have no family. Thomas found me 2 years ago, disoriented and with no memories, and he's taken care of me ever since. Daniel felt the ground open up beneath his feet. Amnesia. His wife was alive, but she didn't remember him, didn't remember their life together, their marriage, everything they had built. You have a scar on your right wrist, he said desperately, from when you fell off your bike at age 10, and a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on your left shoulder. Isabella's eyes widened. Instinctively, she looked at her right wrist, where the scar was clearly visible, then brought her hand to her left shoulder. How do you know that? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Thomas watched the scene with growing concern. Lucy, you never told me about those marks. Because they're intimate details, Daniel said, tears beginning to form in his eyes. Because I'm your husband, and I know every detail of your body, every story behind every mark. Emily, who was watching everything without fully understanding the complexity of the situation, pulled on Isabella's dress. Miss Lucy, do you really not remember him? He looks very sad. Isabella looked at the child, then at Daniel, and something in her expression softened. I feel like I've seen your face before, in dreams, maybe, but I can't remember. The accident, Daniel murmured. You were in a car accident 3 years ago. Everyone thought you were gone. We held a funeral. I mourned you every day. Accident? She repeated, putting her hands to her head. I sometimes have flashes, confusing images. I wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that I've forgotten something very important. Thomas moved closer to her, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. Lucy, you don't have to force yourself to remember anything. The doctor said your memory might come back naturally over time. Ooh, you took her to a doctor? Daniel asked. A new wave of emotions hitting him, gratitude mixed with jealousy for this man who had cared for his wife when he believed she was lost forever. Of course I did, Thomas answered with dignity. When I found her on the road, she was injured and disoriented. She had no ID, didn't know her name or where she came from. The doctor said she had suffered severe head trauma. Isabella looked from one man to the other, clearly overwhelmed by the situation. I need time to process all this, she said, her voice trembling. Of course, Daniel said quickly. But please, don't disappear again. Let me help you remember. Let me show you our house, our photos, our life together. Our life, she repeated softly, as if testing the words. Were we happy? The question hit Daniel like a knife to the heart. Were they happy? In the early years, maybe, but in the last years before the accident, they fought constantly about having children, about social pressure, about the life she felt was suffocating her. We had our moments, he answered honestly. It wasn't always easy, but I loved you. I still do. Emily, who had been quiet for a few moments, suddenly looked at Isabella with admiration. You're very pretty, Miss Lucy, and you have gentle hands, just like a mother's. The child's innocent observation brought tears to Isabella's eyes. During their marriage, she had never shown any maternal interest, always saying she wasn't good with children. But here she was, interacting naturally with Emily as if it were the most natural thing in the world. 3 days had passed since the encounter in the square, and Daniel could barely concentrate on the steelworks business. His mind was completely consumed by the image of Isabella, or Lucy as she believed her name was, and the way she had looked at him with that genuine confusion in her eyes. He had spent the nights going through photo albums, looking for images that might awaken her memories. His house, once a silent mausoleum dedicated to the memory of his lost wife, now buzzed with a painful hope that perhaps he could recover not only Isabella, but the marriage they had lost long before the accident. That Friday morning, Daniel decided to go back to the town square. He couldn't stay away any longer, not when he knew she was alive and breathing just a few miles away. He arrived around 10 o'clock, expecting to find her on the usual bench, but the spot was empty. "Mr. Daniel," a childish voice called him from behind the trees. Emily came running, her clothes even dirtier than before, her hair a mess. But there was a sparkle in her eyes that wasn't there the first time they met. "Emily, how are you, little one?" he asked, crouching to be at her level. "I'm fine. Miss Lucy gave me a snack yesterday and talked with me for a long time," she answered excitedly. "She asked me a lot of questions about you." Daniel's heart raced. "What kind of questions?" "She wanted to know what you were like, if you seemed sad, if you were nice to me," Emily reported, sitting on the bench next to him. "I think she's curious about you, but she's also scared." "Scared of what?" "I don't know, but when I say your name, she gets a strange look on her face, like something hurts in her head." Daniel sighed heavily. Isabella's amnesia was more complex than he had imagined. Perhaps forcing memories caused real physical pain, not just emotional. "Emily, can I ask you something?" he said, observing the girl who had completely changed his life. "How did you know she was my wife? What made you keep that photo?" Emily's little face darkened slightly. "I found it a few weeks ago, dropped on the street. When I saw Miss Lucy, she looked just like the photo. I thought maybe someone was looking for her, that someone missed her like I miss my mom." The simplicity of the answer touched Daniel deeply. An abandoned child, alone in the world, trying to reunite other people with their families because she understood the pain of separation. "And where do you sleep, Emily? Where do you get food?" "I sleep wherever I can," she replied with a disturbing naturalness. "Sometimes people give me food. Miss Lucy always gives me something when she sees me." Daniel felt a pang of guilt. He had been so consumed by his own problems that he hadn't properly considered the child's desperate situation. "Would you like to stay at my house, at least until we sort out the situation with your mother?" Emily's eyes lit up, but then filled with suspicion. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "Because you helped me find my wife," he answered honestly, "and because no child should live on the street." At that moment, Thomas appeared in the square, walking slowly with a cane. When he saw Daniel, his expression became cautious. "Mr. Harrison," he greeted formally, "Lucy told me you met here a few days ago." How is she?" Daniel asked eagerly. "Has she remembered anything?" Thomas sat down heavily on the bench, looking older than his 67 years. "Actually, that's why I came looking for you. Since your conversation, she's been having episodes. Episodes. Nightmares. Fragments of memory that scare her. Yesterday she woke up screaming about a wedding, about someone calling her Isabella. But when she tries to focus on the images, she gets terrible headaches." Daniel stood up abruptly. "I need to see her. Maybe if she sees familiar objects, if she visits our house." "No," Thomas interrupted firmly. The doctor was clear. Forcing memories can cause permanent damage. She needs to remember naturally in her own time. "But how long could that take?" Daniel asked desperately. "Months, years. Maybe never," Thomas replied with kindness but brutal honesty. Emily, who had been listening silently, suddenly stood up. "Mr. Thomas, can I tell you something? Sometimes, when Miss Lucy looks at me, her eyes get watery. And one time she said I reminded her of someone, but she didn't know who. Thomas frowned. She never told me that. Maybe because she doesn't want to worry you, the girl suggested with surprising wisdom for her age. Daniel sat down again, an idea beginning to form in his mind. Thomas, I know you don't know me and have no reason to trust me, but I need your help. What kind of help? Let me spend time with her, not forcing memories, but simply being present. Maybe the memories will come back naturally if she gets used to me again. The old man considered the proposal for a long moment. And what if she never remembers? What if this life she's built as Lucy is all she can have? The question hit Daniel like a dagger. He had considered that possibility, but pushed the thought away as it was too unbearable. Then I will love Lucy, as I loved Isabella, he finally replied, because whatever name she uses, she's still the woman I fell in love with. Thomas studied Daniel's face for a long time, as if trying to read his soul. There's something you need to know, he said finally. Lucy is not the same person you knew. These 2 years have changed her. She's more free, more spontaneous. She smiles more easily, but she also gets scared more easily. What do you mean? The Lucy I know is terrified of enclosed spaces. She works as a seamstress at home, but she can't stay in small rooms for long. She's terrified of shouting and arguments. Sometimes, when she hears raised voices on the street, she hides until the noise stops. Daniel felt a chill in his stomach. During the last years of their marriage, he and Isabella fought constantly. Heated arguments about children, about the future, about the social expectations of Willow Creek. Had his own behavior contributed to her mental state? She works? He asked, trying to change the subject to something less painful. Yes, she's a talented seamstress. She mends clothes for some families in the area and does small sewing jobs. She manages to support herself, although she lives very simply. Emily, who had been quiet during the adults' conversation, suddenly perked up. I know where she works. I can show Mr. Daniel. I don't think it's a good idea to show up at her workplace unannounced, Thomas said cautiously. Then help me, Daniel pleaded. Arrange a meeting. Tell her I'd like to talk again. Please. The old man sighed deeply. I'll talk to her, but on one condition. If she says no, you have to respect her decision. Lucy has built a life here, a life that makes her happy. I won't allow that to be destroyed, even if you are really her husband. Daniel nodded, although every fiber of his being protested the idea of accepting a refusal. I understand. As Thomas walked away, leaning on his cane, Emily took Daniel's hand. Mr. Daniel, do you think Miss Lucy will remember you? I don't know, little one, he answered honestly, but I'm going to try to be patient and let it happen naturally. And what if she never remembers? Daniel looked at this extraordinary child who had entered his life and turned everything upside down. Then I'll try to fall in love with her all over again, because sometimes, Emily, the people we love change, and we have to learn to love them in a new way. The meeting was set for the following Sunday at the small corner cafe where Isabella, Lucy, used to have her breakfast on weekends. Daniel arrived 15 minutes early, his hands sweating as he adjusted his tie for the 5th time. He had chosen more casual clothes, remembering Thomas's observation about how she had changed. Emily was by his side, wearing a clean dress Daniel had bought for her the day before. The girl had insisted on accompanying them, claiming she felt like a bridge between the two adults. Daniel didn't have the heart to deny the request, especially since Emily had been living in his house for a week and had already become a constant presence in his life. Mr. Daniel, you're nervous, Emily observed, swinging her little legs on the cafe's high chair. A little, he admitted, looking out the window for the 10th time. It's complicated to meet someone you love when that person doesn't remember you. But she can learn to like you again, can't she? the girl asked optimistically. Before Daniel could answer, he saw Isabella walking down the sidewalk, accompanied by Thomas. She wore a simple green dress, and her hair was tied in a low bun. There was something different in her posture, more relaxed, less rigid than he remembered from the last years of their marriage. When she entered the cafe, her eyes met Daniel's immediately. There was a moment of hesitation, as if she were gathering courage before approaching the table. "Hi," she said softly, sitting in the chair Thomas pulled out for her. "Hi," Daniel replied, his voice hoarser than he intended. Emily broke the awkward silence. "Miss Lucy, look at the pretty dress Mr. Daniel bought for me." Isabella smiled genuinely for the first time since entering the cafe. "You look beautiful, dear. Green is a color that suits you." "Mr. Daniel is taking care of me now," Emily continued excitedly. "He said I can live in his big house and have my own room." Isabella's eyes turned to Daniel with an expression of surprise and something that might have been approval. "That's very kind of you," she said. "Emily needs a home," Daniel replied, "and well, my house was very empty." An uncomfortable silence settled. Thomas cleared his throat. "Lucy has some questions for you, if you don't mind." Daniel straightened in his chair. "Of course. Anything." Isabella took a deep breath. "What was our marriage like? Before what happened to me?" The question hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. How could he explain the complexity of their relationship without scaring or hurting her? "In the early years, we were happy," he began carefully. "We met at university. You studied literature, and I, engineering. You loved reading poetry out loud to me, even though I didn't understand much." A flash of something crossed Isabella's eyes. "Poetry," she repeated softly. "Sometimes I wake up with verses in my head, but I don't know where they come from." Daniel's heart raced. "You memorized entire sonnets. Your favorite was 'So long as men can breathe or eyes can see' from Shakespeare." "So long as men can breathe or eyes can see," she murmured, and for a moment seemed lost in thought. "Go on," Thomas urged gently. Daniel hesitated. "In the last few years, things got harder. We argued about having children. You wanted them. I didn't think I was ready. The social pressure in Willow Creek was intense. Everyone expected us to have a big family, to be the perfect high society couple." "I wanted children?" Isabella asked, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel nodded, watching as she looked at Emily with an affectionate expression. "Very much. But I was so focused on the company, so worried about responsibilities, that I always found excuses to postpone it." "And I accepted that?" Her voice carried a note of disbelief. "At first, yes, but over time you became more frustrated, more distant. We argued almost every night in the last few months." Isabella closed her eyes for a moment. "I sometimes have nightmares where there's a lot of shouting, raised voices that make me feel scared." Daniel felt a pang of guilt. I yelled at you. When I was stressed with work, when the financial pressures mounted, it wasn't your fault, it was mine." "Why do you think that Isabella disappeared that night?" she asked, looking him directly in the eyes. The question Daniel had avoided asking himself for 3 years. "That night, we had our worst fight. You said you felt trapped in our life, that you couldn't breathe. You said you married me because of family pressure, not for true love." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "I said that?" "Yes, and I replied that maybe it would be better if you found someone who made you truly happy. You left the house crying. Those were the last words we exchanged." The silence at the table was heavy. Emily, sensing the tension, took Isabella's hand. "Miss Lucy, don't be sad. The past is in the past." Isabella squeezed the child's small hand. "You're right, dear. Can I ask one more question?" she said to Daniel. "As many as you want." "Did you look for me after I disappeared?" "For weeks," he answered immediately. "The police, private investigators, posters all over town. When they found the wrecked car and an unrecognizable body with your documents, I gave up looking. I thought you had left this world." "And how was your life these 3 years?" The question was simple, but the answer was complex. "Empty," he said honestly. "I worked obsessively, avoided social commitments, turned our house into a museum of our life together. Until I found Emily, I was just existing." Thomas spoke for the first time. "Lucy told me that since she saw you, she's been having more memory episodes, confused fragments, but more frequent." "It's true," she confirmed. "I dream of a big house with a garden full of white roses, and there's a man who looks like you, but younger, more smiling." "Our house has a garden of white roses," Daniel said, his voice choked with emotion. "You planted them in the 2nd year of our marriage." Isabella put her hands to her head. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life, like Lucy is real and Isabella is just a bad dream." "Maybe both are real," Emily suggested with the innocent wisdom of children. "Maybe you're both at the same time." Isabella looked at the girl with admiration. "You're very smart for being only 4 years old." At that moment, a man of about 35 approached the table. Daniel immediately recognized the face. It was Jacob, his younger brother and junior partner at the steelworks. "Daniel," Jacob said, his voice laden with a strange tension, "we need to talk. Now." "Jacob, it's not a good time," Daniel replied, annoyed by the interruption. "It's about the company. It's urgent." Jacob's gaze quickly passed over Isabella, and Daniel noticed a flash of recognition and fear in his brother's eyes. "Go," Isabella said softly. "We can continue our conversation another day." "Are you sure?" "I am. And Daniel, thank you for being honest about our past. I know it wasn't easy." Daniel stood up reluctantly. "Can I see you again this week?" "You can," she replied with a small smile, "but this time bring more photos. I want to see if I can remember anything else." As Daniel left with Jacob, Emily remained at the table with Isabella and Thomas, chattering about her new life. But Daniel couldn't help but notice the disturbed expression on his brother's face, as if Jacob had seen a ghost. "What is it, Jacob? Why the urgency?" Daniel asked as soon as they left the cafe, his irritation evident. Jacob looked around nervously before answering. "Not here. Let's go to the office." The two brothers walked in silence to the headquarters of Harrison Steelworks, located in the industrial district of Willow Creek. Daniel noticed that Jacob was sweating excessively and seemed unable to maintain eye contact, a behavior very different from his usually confident personality. "Now you can talk," Daniel said, as soon as they entered his office and closed the door. Jacob poured himself a glass of water with trembling hands. "Daniel, are you sure that woman in the cafe was Isabella?" "I'm absolutely sure. Why do you ask?" "Because if it's true, we have a very serious problem." Daniel frowned. "What kind of problem?" Jacob walked to the window, avoiding looking directly at his brother. "Do you remember Isabella's life insurance policy? The one we took out when you got married?" "Of course, $2 million. The money I used to expand the company after the accident." "Exactly," Jacob said, his voice getting lower. "Daniel, if Isabella is alive, it means we committed insurance fraud. They'll want the money back, with interest and penalties." Daniel felt as if the floor had disappeared from under his feet. In the last 3 years, he had invested heavily in the company, hired new employees, bought modern equipment. The entire growth of the steelworks had been financed with the insurance money. "What would be the total?" he asked, already dreading the answer. "Approximately $4 million, Jacob replied, finally turning to face him. "Daniel, we don't have that money available." It's all invested in the company. But it was a genuine mistake. We believed she was dead. That doesn't matter to the insurance company. They'll sue for fraud, and we'll probably face criminal charges too. Daniel slumped into his executive chair, the weight of the situation crashing down on him like an avalanche. His joy at finding Isabella again was being quickly replaced by financial panic and fear of the legal consequences. "There's more," Jacob continued hesitantly. "What do you mean, there's more?" "Remember when you gave me power of attorney to handle the legal affairs after Isabella's death was declared?" "I remember. You took care of everything because I was too devastated to deal with bureaucracy." Jacob took a deep breath. "I used part of the insurance money to pay off personal debts, about $500,000. Daniel stood up abruptly, his face flushing with anger. "You did what?" "I had a gambling problem, Daniel. I owed dangerous people. I thought you'd never find out, that the money wouldn't be missed. You stole from me. You stole from my wife's memory. I was going to pay it back. I was paying it back in installments, reinvesting profits from the company." Daniel wanted to strangle his brother, but forced himself to stay in control. "Jacob, do you realize the magnitude of what you've done? If Isabella is officially alive, not only will we have to return the insurance money, but you'll also have to explain where the 500,000 you embezzled went. I know, that's why I'm desperate." Jacob exploded. "Daniel, you have to keep this a secret, at least until we find a solution." "Keep it a secret?" Daniel repeated incredulously. "Are you suggesting I hide the fact that my wife is alive to protect you from your own criminal actions?" "I'm suggesting you think about the consequences. If this comes out now, we lose the company, I go to jail, and you'll be left with nothing." Daniel walked to the window, watching the movement of the industrial district. Employees came and went from their shifts. Entire families depended on the jobs the steelworks provided. If the company went bankrupt, it wouldn't just be him who suffered. "I need time to think," he said finally. "Daniel, you can't tell Isabella, at least not yet. Don't tell me what I can or can't do with my wife. Think about her situation too," Jacob argued desperately. "She's building a new life, apparently happy. Do you want to destroy that by revealing that her existence could cause the financial ruin of dozens of families?" The argument hit Daniel at his most vulnerable point. Isabella really did seem happier as Lucy than she had been in the last years of their marriage. Did he have the right to drag her back into his complicated life? At that moment, the office phone rang. Daniel answered distractedly. "Mr. Harrison, this is Thomas Ribeiro. I need to speak with you urgently." "Thomas, did something happen to Isabella?" "To Lucy?" "Not exactly, but I found out something important about her past. Something that explains a lot." Daniel looked at Jacob, who had paled upon hearing Thomas's name. "You can speak." "I'd prefer to in person. Can you come to my house this afternoon? It's about Lucy's family, about a sister she might have had." "A sister?" Daniel repeated, confused. "A twin sister," Thomas said, "who might be connected to that little girl, Emily." The call ended, leaving Daniel in a state of shock. A twin sister? How was that possible? Isabella had never mentioned having a sister. "Daniel," Jacob said urgently, "whatever that man found out, you need to be careful if more complications arise." "Stop!" Daniel exploded. "Stop thinking only of yourself. My wife might have a family I don't know about. A child might be involved in all of this, and all you can think about is how to save your own skin. I'm trying to protect both of us. You're trying to protect only yourself. And you know what infuriates me the most? It's that part of me is considering your suggestion. Part of me is thinking about keeping Isabella away to avoid complications." Daniel grabbed his car keys. "I'm going to talk to Thomas. And when I get back, I want a full confession of everything you did with the insurance money. Every single cent. Where are you going?" "To find out the truth, all of it, because apparently for the last 3 years, everyone around me has been lying or hiding things from me." Daniel stormed out of the office, slamming the door and leaving Jacob alone with his fears and guilt. As he drove through the city, his mind buzzed with questions. A twin sister would explain a lot, maybe even the identity confusion at the accident, but it also raised even more disturbing questions about everything that had happened. When he arrived at Thomas's modest house in the residential part of town, he found the old man sitting on the porch, a grave expression on his face. Emily was playing in the small front yard, apparently having been brought there by Isabella. "Where's Lucy?" Daniel asked. "Inside, resting. She had another headache episode after our talk at the cafe," Thomas replied, indicating a chair beside him. "Thomas, tell me about this twin sister." The old man sighed heavily. "During these 2 years caring for Lucy, I was always intrigued by the fact that some of her memories didn't make sense. She talked about a poor childhood, about abandonment, about drugs in the family, but you described a well-educated, upper-class woman. Go on." "I started investigating on my own. I found records of a woman named Chloe Smith, Isabella's identical twin, who was given up for adoption at birth." Daniel felt his world spin again. Identical twin. Yes. And Daniel, Chloe Smith is Emily's mother. Chloe Smith is Emily's mother, Daniel repeated, feeling as if he were losing control of everything around him. Thomas nodded gravely. "The physical similarities between Lucy and the child always caught my attention. When you mentioned Isabella had a scar on her wrist, I checked. Emily has the exact same mark." Daniel looked at the girl playing innocently in the yard, his mind trying to process the implications of this revelation. But how is it possible that Isabella never mentioned having a twin sister? From what I could find out, Isabella's family hid Chloe's existence. Apparently, when the twins were born, one of them, Chloe, was immediately given up for adoption. The official family only kept Isabella. Why? Financial issues, from what I understand. The family was going through hard times back then and couldn't support 2 children. Daniel stood up abruptly, walking to the garden fence where Emily was drawing in the dirt with a stick. The girl had the same expressive eyes as Isabella, the same curve of the face, the same delicate hand gestures. "Emily," he called softly. "Hi, Mr. Daniel," she replied cheerfully. "I'm drawing a family. Want to see?" The drawing in the dirt showed 4 figures of different sizes, clearly representing adults and children. "Who are these people?" he asked. "It's you, me, Miss Lucy, and Mr. Thomas," she explained. "We're a family now, aren't we?" The child's innocent words touched Daniel deeply. Emily had created a family in her mind from the fragments of affection she had received in the last few days. "Emily, do you remember your mum?" he asked carefully. The girl's face darkened, a little. She had hair like Miss Lucy's, but she was always very sad. She cried a lot and sometimes talked to herself. "Do you know her name?" "I think it was Chloe, but people sometimes called her other names." Daniel walked back to Thomas, who had watched the entire interaction. "How did you find all this out?" "I have a friend who works at the county clerk's office. I started investigating when I realized some of Lucy's memories didn't match her supposed identity. I found the birth record of twins, Isabella and Chloe Smith, born on the same day, but only Isabella remained with the official parents. And where is Chloe now?" "She died 6 months ago," Thomas replied sadly. "Overdose. That's when Emily appeared on the streets. She was with her mother when it happened and ran away, scared." Daniel felt a crushing weight in his chest. Emily's biological mother was dead. The girl had witnessed something traumatic, and now he discovered she was his wife's niece. "Thomas, does Isabella know about all this?" "Not yet. I was waiting to be sure before telling her. And, well, you arrived first with your own revelations." At that moment, the house door opened, and Isabella appeared, looking pale and confused. Thomas, is everything okay? I heard voices." She stopped when she saw Daniel, and a shy smile appeared on her face. "Daniel, you came back." "Lucy, sit down," Thomas said gently. "We have some important things to talk about." Isabella sat in the chair next to them, her eyes darting from Thomas to Daniel with curiosity and a touch of apprehension. "What happened?" she asked. Daniel looked at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. "Lucy, we've discovered something about your family, about who you really are. My family. You have had a sister, a twin sister named Chloe." Isabella's eyes widened. "A sister? But that's impossible. I would remember." "Chloe was given up for adoption when you were born," Thomas explained. "You never knew she existed." Isabella put her hands to her head, as if in pain. "I sometimes have strange dreams where there are two of me. I always thought they were nightmares caused by the amnesia." "There's more," Daniel said delicately. "Chloe had a daughter, Emily." Isabella turned to look at the girl playing in the yard, and something in her expression changed. "Emily is. She's my niece." "She is," Thomas confirmed. "The physical similarities make sense now. You have the same scar on your wrist, the same gestures, the same facial structure." Tears began to stream down Isabella's face. "Where is Chloe? Where is my sister?" The silence that followed was eloquent. Isabella understood immediately. "She's gone," she whispered, the tears increasing. "My sister is gone, and I didn't even know she existed." Daniel knelt beside her chair. "Lucy, I'm so sorry. I know what it's like to lose someone important." "Emily is all alone in the world," Isabella sobbed. "A 4-year-old child, all alone, and I don't even remember being her aunt." At that moment, Emily ran up to them, sensing that something was wrong. "Miss Lucy, why are you crying?" Isabella instinctively pulled the girl into her lap, hugging her tightly. "Emily, dear, we found out we're family, real family." "What do you mean?" the child asked, confused. "Your mommy was my sister. That makes me your aunt, and you my niece." Emily's face lit up. "So you're my blood family, like in the stories Mr. Daniel tells me?" "I am, my dear. I'm your family." Daniel watched the scene with emotion mixed with despair. The connection between Isabella and Emily was natural and immediate, but he knew his financial situation was about to complicate everything. How could he properly care for Emily if he lost the company? How could he offer stability to Isabella if his life was falling apart? "Daniel," Isabella said, still hugging Emily, "does this mean Emily is officially our responsibility?" "Our?" he repeated, surprised by the automatic inclusion. "Well, if I'm your wife and her aunt, wouldn't it be natural for us to take care of her together?" The simplicity with which Isabella had rearranged their lives into a family unit touched Daniel deeply, but it also terrified him. How could he explain that he might not have the resources to care for even himself, let alone a family? "Lucy," he said carefully, "there are some complications we need to resolve first." "What kind of complications?" Daniel looked at Thomas, then at Emily, trying to choose his words. "Legal issues related to your disappearance. Your official status hasn't been regularized yet." "You mean about me being officially dead?" "Exactly." Isabella considered this for a moment. "How long would it take to resolve?" "I don't know, maybe months. And until then, I'd prefer you continue living as Lucy, for your own protection and to resolve some complex financial matters." Thomas frowned. "What financial matters?" Daniel felt trapped. He couldn't reveal the insurance problem without exposing Jacob and putting the company at risk. "Issues related to my business. Nothing that can't be resolved with time." Isabella studied Daniel's face intently. Even with amnesia, She seemed able to detect when he wasn't being completely honest. "Daniel, is everything okay? You seem worried." "I'm just trying to do the right thing for everyone." "And what would be the right thing?" Daniel looked at the girl in her arms, at the woman he loved and had finally found again, at Thomas, who had cared for her when he couldn't. How could he explain that the right thing might be to leave them alone, away from the problems his life had accumulated? "The right thing would be to ensure you're both safe and cared for," he finally answered. "And you don't trust yourself to do that?" Isabella asked, with a perceptiveness that surprised him. The question hit the core of all of Daniel's fears. Could he really trust himself to protect the people he loved when he had failed so miserably before? 2 weeks passed since the revelation about Chloe, and Daniel's life had become an emotional roller coaster. During the day, he split his time between urgent meetings with lawyers trying to discreetly resolve the insurance issue, visits to Isabella, who was gradually recovering fragments of memory, and caring for Emily, who had adapted surprisingly well to her new life. The girl now attended a private school near Daniel's house, wearing new clothes and having regular meals for the first time in months. But at night, when she slept in the room he had specially decorated for her, Daniel lay awake, calculating and recalculating his finances, trying to find a way to pay off the insurance debt without destroying the company. That Thursday morning, Daniel was in his office when he received a call that would change everything again. "Mr. Harrison, this is Dr. Michael Foster from Santa Casa Hospital. I have information about a patient who was treated here 3 years ago." Daniel's heart raced. "About Isabella?" "Actually, but the woman who was identified as your wife after the accident. I need to speak with you urgently." An hour later, Daniel was in Dr. Foster's office, a middle-aged man with a serious and worried expression. "Mr. Harrison, I've reviewed all the medical records from the night of your wife's accident. There are inconsistencies that went unnoticed at the time due to the urgency of the situation." "Oh dear, what kind of inconsistencies?" "The woman who died showed signs of long-term drug use, specifically crack and heroin. There was also evidence of chronic malnutrition and health problems related to a precarious lifestyle." Daniel felt a chill in his stomach. That doesn't make sense. Isabella never used drugs. Exactly. But Chloe Smith, the twin sister, had a history of addiction registered at other hospitals in the region. The realization hit Daniel like a lightning bolt. "Are you saying the one who died in the accident was Chloe, not Isabella?" "It's the most likely hypothesis. The twins were physically identical, and Chloe was carrying Isabella's documents at the time of the accident." "How is that possible?" Dr. Foster sighed heavily. "From what we've been able to piece together, Chloe had assumed her sister's identity for some time, probably to escape problems related to her addiction or debts to dealers." Daniel stood up abruptly, starting to pace. "So Isabella was being pursued by someone? Is that why she disappeared?" "Possibly. Or maybe she discovered her sister was using her identity and tried to confront her. The accident might have happened during that confrontation." "And why are you telling me this now? Why not 3 years ago?" "Because we only recently learned of Chloe's existence when a social worker came looking for information about an orphan's mother. When we compared the medical records, the discrepancies became obvious." Daniel stopped pacing. "Emily? Someone is investigating Emily's case." "Yes, a social worker named Beatrice Collins is trying to locate living relatives of the child for adoption or legal guardianship proceedings." Panic seized Daniel. If the social worker found out Isabella was alive and that Emily was her niece, the whole carefully constructed arrangement could fall apart, especially if the authorities started investigating the circumstances of Isabella's supposed death. "Dr. Foster, have you reported these findings to the authorities yet?" Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first, considering the complexity of the situation. Can I ask you a favor? Can you wait a few days before formalizing this? I need time to organize some legal matters. The doctor hesitated. Mr. Harrison, I understand it's a delicate situation, but we have ethical obligations. Just 1 week, Daniel pleaded desperately. 1 week for me to resolve the child's situation and ensure she's not harmed by all this confusion. After much internal debate, Dr. Foster agreed. 1 week, but after that I must report my findings. Daniel left the hospital in a state of total shock. His head was spinning with the implications of everything he had discovered. Chloe had assumed Isabella's identity, probably fleeing serious problems. Isabella had disappeared, perhaps to protect herself or to confront her sister. And now, 3 years later, the authorities were starting to connect the dots. When he got home, he found Emily playing in the backyard under the care of the housekeeper he had hired. The girl ran to him with a new drawing. "Uncle Daniel, look what I drew at school today." The drawing showed a big house with a garden and 3 figures holding hands, a tall man, a woman with long hair and a small child. In the corner it was written in crooked letters, "My family." "It's beautiful." "Princess," he said, picking her up. "The teacher said I can be in the school's spring fair. Can I, Uncle Daniel, please?" Daniel looked at this child who had become so important in his life, knowing that everything could change drastically in the next few days. "Of course you can, Emily. And can Aunt Lucy come too?" "We'll see," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. That afternoon, Daniel visited Isabella at her small house in the residential neighborhood. She greeted him with a smile that was becoming more and more natural, and he noticed she seemed more relaxed with each encounter. "How was your day?" she asked, offering him a coffee. "Complicated," he answered honestly. "Want to talk about it?" Daniel studied her carefully. Isabella, Lucy, seemed emotionally stronger than in the last years of their marriage. There was a serenity in her that he didn't remember seeing before. "Lucy, if I told you something very serious about your past, something that could change everything again, would you be prepared to hear it?" She watched him for a long moment. "It has to do with Chloe, doesn't it?" "How did you know?" "I've been having more flashbacks. Images of a woman who looks like me, but who is always agitated, always running from something, and there are memories of arguments, of fear." Daniel took a deep breath. "Chloe was using your identity, Lucy. She took your name, your documents, your life." Isabella's eyes widened. "Why?" "Drug problems, dangerous debts. She was running from something serious. And me? What was I doing during all this?" "Probably trying to protect her, or trying to confront her, to get your identity back." Isabella stood up and walked to the window, processing the information. "That explains why I sometimes feel like 2 different people. Some memories are mine, others are Chloe's." "There's more," Daniel said reluctantly. "The person who died in the accident wasn't you, it was Chloe." Isabella turned abruptly. "Chloe is dead?" "Yes, for 3 years. In the accident everyone believed was yours." Tears began to stream down Isabella's face. "My sister has been dead for 3 years, and I didn't even know she existed. I couldn't even say goodbye." Daniel approached and hugged her gently. "I'm so sorry, Lucy." "And now?" she asked between sobs. "What happens now?" "Now the authorities might start investigating, and when they find out you're alive—" "We'll lose Emily, won't we?" she asked with painful intuition. "Possibly." Isabella pulled away from him, wiping her tears. "I won't let that happen. Emily has already lost her mother. She can't lose anyone else." "What are you suggesting?" "That we do everything by the book this time. that I officially reclaim my identity, that we take legal guardianship of Emily, that we face whatever consequences come together." The determination in Isabella's voice impressed Daniel, but it also terrified him. She had no idea of the financial problems he would face when her resurrection was discovered. "Lucy, there are complications you don't know about, problems that could destroy us financially." "What kind of problems?" Daniel looked at this woman who was willing to fight for a family she barely remembered having, knowing he would have to choose between total honesty or continuing to protect her from the consequences of his own actions. Daniel looked at Isabella for a long moment, knowing the time had come to tell the whole truth. He could no longer hide the financial problems her resurrection would cause, nor protect her from the consequences of 3 years of decisions made in her absence. "Lucy, when Chloe passed away, I received a $2 million life insurance payout," he began, his voice heavy with guilt. "I see. And now you'll have to pay it back. Not just pay it back. With interest and penalties, the debt is up to $4 million. And I invested it all in the company. I don't have that money available." Isabella sat down slowly, processing the information. $4 million. Is that enough to bankrupt your company?" "Yes, and there's more." Daniel told her about the funds embezzled by Jacob, about his brother's gambling debts, about how half of the company's expansion in the last 3 years had been financed with fraudulently obtained money. "So when I officially resurrect, not only will you lose the company, but Jacob could go to jail," she summarized. "Exactly. And how many people work at the steelworks?" 120 employees, not counting their families. Isabella was silent for several minutes, looking out the window at the street. Daniel could see she was weighing all the information, calculating the consequences of every possible decision. "Daniel, can I ask you a very direct question?" "Of course." "If I remained Lucy forever, if I never officially came back as Isabella, would that solve all the financial problems?" The question hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. "Lucy, you can't be suggesting. Answer the question." "Yes," he admitted reluctantly. "If you remained legally dead, the insurance debt would never be questioned. And Emily? We could adopt her as Lucy. You would officially become her adoptive mother. And our life together. We would have to get married again, you as Lucy, not as Isabella." Isabella stood up and began to pace the small room. "That would mean Isabella Harrison would remain officially dead forever, that I could never claim my inheritance, my assets, my original identity. It would mean that, yes. And you, how would you feel marrying Lucy instead of getting Isabella back?" The question touched the core of all of Daniel's conflicting feelings. "I've fallen in love with the Lucy you've become. You're freer, more spontaneous, more happy than Isabella was in the last few years. But would you feel like you were living a lie?" Daniel thought carefully before answering. "Maybe the lie was Isabella. Maybe Lucy is who you were always meant to be." At that moment the doorbell rang. Isabella went to answer and returned accompanied by a middle-aged, well-dressed woman with a briefcase. "Daniel, this is Beatrice Collins, the social worker Dr. Foster mentioned." Daniel stood up, trying to control the panic that instantly seized him. "Mr. Harrison, I apologize for showing up unannounced," Beatrice said. "But I'm investigating the situation of Emily Smith and have discovered some disturbing information." "What kind of information?" "That the child may have living relatives we were unaware of." Isabella spoke up. "I'm her aunt, sister of the late Chloe Smith." Beatrice opened her briefcase and consulted some documents. "Mrs. Lucy Ribeiro." "Mrs. Ribeiro, we have no records of Chloe Smith having a sister named Lucy Ribeiro." That's because I was adopted as a child, Isabella replied quickly. Chloe and I lost contact for many years. I see, and Mr. Harrison is my fiancé, Isabella said, surprising Daniel. We are temporarily caring for Emily. Beatrice made careful notes. I will need documentation proving the relationship between you and Chloe Smith. I will also need to visit the residence where the child is living and conduct psychological and social evaluations. Of course, Daniel said, trying to keep his voice firm. When would be convenient? Tomorrow morning, if possible. It's an urgent case. After Beatrice left, Isabella and Daniel looked at each other in silence. The situation had become even more complicated. How are we going to prove you're Chloe's sister when you're officially someone else? He asked. I don't know, she admitted, but we'll figure something out. That night, Daniel returned home to find Emily asleep on the living room sofa, hugging a teddy bear he had bought for her. The housekeeper explained that the girl had insisted on waiting up for him. Daniel carefully picked Emily up and carried her to her room. As he laid her in bed, she opened her eyes sleepily. Uncle Daniel, did you talk to Aunt Lucy today? I did, Princess. Is she going to live with us soon? The innocent question broke Daniel's heart. How could he explain to a 4-year-old that her new family could be destroyed by legal and financial complications? We're talking about it, Emily. I hope so. I really like Aunt Lucy. She reminds me of Mommy, but a happy Mommy. After Emily fell back asleep, Daniel sat in his office late into the night, trying to find a solution to his problems. For the first time in 3 years, he had a family again, but keeping that family could cost him everything he had built professionally. The next morning, Beatrice Collins arrived promptly at 9, accompanied by another social worker. Daniel had carefully prepared the house, organizing basic documents about Emily and rehearsing possible questions. Where is the child? Beatrice asked. At school, Daniel replied. I thought it best to keep her in her normal routine. And your fiancée? She's on her way. As planned, Isabella appeared a few minutes later, carrying a folder with documents that Thomas had helped organize during the night. Mrs. Ribeiro, did you bring the documentation proving your relationship with Chloe? Beatrice asked. Isabella handed over the folder. Knowing the documents were partially forged with the help of Thomas's contacts at the clerk's office, Beatrice examined the papers carefully. These records show you were separated in childhood due to adoption. How did you reconnect? Through Emily, Isabella answered. When I saw her on the street, I immediately recognized the physical similarities. I started investigating and discovered we were sisters. And you decided to take custody together? Yes, Daniel said. Lucy and I met through Emily and, well, we fell in love during the process of caring for her. The story sounded plausible, but Daniel could see that Beatrice maintained professional skepticism. I will need to interview Emily alone when she returns from school, Beatrice said. I will also conduct a full background check on both of you. Of course, Isabella agreed. After the visit, Daniel and Isabella were left alone, both aware that they had just committed to an official version of events that could have serious legal consequences if discovered. Lucy, do you realize we just lied to an official authority? I do. And do you realize it might be the only way to keep our family together? Daniel looked at this woman who was willing to give up her true identity to protect an orphan and preserve the life they had begun to build together. If we do this, he said, there's no turning back. Isabella Harrison will remain buried forever. Maybe it's time to let Isabella rest in peace, she replied. Maybe Lucy is who I was always supposed to be. 3 days after Beatrice's visit, Daniel received a call that made his blood run cold. It was from a private investigator hired by the insurance company to review old cases with suspected fraud. Mr. Harrison, I'm Ricardo Matos, an investigator with trust insurance. We are reviewing the claim process for your late wife and have found some inconsistencies we would like to clarify. What kind of inconsistencies? Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Discrepancies in the medical reports, witnesses who reported seeing a woman very similar to your wife in the region days after the supposed accident, and most importantly, hospital records that do not match the medical profile of Isabella Harrison. Daniel felt his legs go weak. May I ask when you plan to conclude this investigation? In approximately 2 weeks. I'd like to reschedule our meeting for this Friday. Of course, Daniel replied, knowing he had no choice. When he hung up the phone, he realized he was sweating coldly. 2 weeks. He had only 2 weeks before the whole truth came out in an official and devastating way. That afternoon, he met with Isabella at Thomas's house, where they had decided to have their most delicate conversations away from prying ears. The insurance company is investigating, he said bluntly. Isabella paled. How much time do we have? 2 weeks, maybe less. And Emily? Beatrice Collins has temporarily approved our joint custody, but if they find out who you really are, we lose everything, she completed. Thomas, who was listening to the conversation in silence, spoke up. There is an alternative you may not have considered. What is it? They both asked simultaneously. Isabella can officially reassume her identity, but claims she suffered total amnesia during these 3 years. We say she was mentally incapacitated, which would nullify any liability over the insurance payment. Daniel frowned. Would that work? Maybe, with proper medical reports and witnesses confirming her compromised mental state during that whole period. You could argue it was a genuine error, not fraud. But I'd still have to return the insurance money, Daniel said. Probably, but without the criminal penalties. Isabella stood up and began to walk around the room. And Emily, what happens to her if I officially become Isabella again? As Isabella, you would have automatic legal rights over your twin sister's daughter, Thomas explained. It would be easier to get permanent custody. But Daniel would lose the company, she said, looking at him sadly. Not necessarily, a new voice intervened. The three turned to see Jacob standing in the doorway, a strange expression on his face. Jacob, Daniel said, how did you find us here? I followed you. I needed to talk urgently. If it's to make more excuses for your crimes. No, Jacob interrupted. It's to offer a solution. Daniel crossed his arms. What kind of solution? I found a buyer for my share of the company, an investor from Crestview who is willing to pay $3.5 million for my shares. $3.5 million? Daniel repeated, surprised. Jacob's share in the company was worth at most $1.5 million in the current market. He sees growth potential that we didn't. The important thing is, with this money, I can cover my part of the insurance debt and still help with the rest. And what's the catch? Daniel asked suspiciously. The buyer wants total operational control over production. You would remain president, but he would make all the decisions about expansion, contracts, and investments. That means I'd lose control of the company I built. It means you'd keep the company running and protect the employees' jobs, Jacob corrected. And most importantly, you'd keep Emily and Isabella safe. Isabella watched the discussion between the brothers intently. Daniel, who is this buyer? Why would he pay so much for a company he doesn't even know well? Jacob hesitated. It's complicated. What do you mean, complicated? She insisted. The buyer is Arthur Fisher. He was a close friend of Chloe's. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Arthur Fisher was Chloe's boyfriend? Isabella asked. More than that, Jacob admitted reluctantly. They were partners in some irregular activities. Shudi, what kind of irregular activities? Small-scale drug trafficking. Arthur financed, Chloe distributed. Daniel stood up abruptly. Are you suggesting I take money from a drug dealer to solve my problems? I'm suggesting you take money from a businessman who wants to legitimize his investments, Jacob corrected. Arthur got out of trafficking 2 years ago. Now he has a chain of gas stations and wants to diversify into industry. And why would he be specifically interested in our company? Jacob looked at Isabella before answering. Because when he found out you were alive, he wanted to make peace with the past. He blames himself for the situation that led to Chloe's destruction. Isabella sat down heavily. Arthur knows I'm alive? He does. And he wants to talk to you. This is getting more and more dangerous, Thomas said. How many more people know about Lucy's situation? For now, just Arthur, Jacob replied. But he's not a threat. On the contrary, he wants to help. In exchange for what? Daniel asked. In exchange for forgiveness. He wants Isabella to know that he tried to save Chloe several times, that he offered treatment, that he did everything he could. And why should I believe that? Because, a male voice said from the door, you can ask me directly. Everyone turned to see a man of about 40, well-dressed but with visible scars on his face and hands. It was clearly someone who had lived a hard life but was now trying to project respectability. Arthur Fisher, he introduced himself, addressing mainly Isabella. Isabella, I imagine you don't remember me, but I knew your sister very well. What do you want? Daniel asked aggressively. I want to make up for the mistakes of the past, Arthur answered calmly. Chloe died because of the drugs I supplied. That's something I carry on my conscience every day. And buying our company will clear your conscience? Isabella questioned. No, but it will ensure that Emily has a stable future, and it will allow you to stay together as a family. Isabella studied Arthur's face for a long moment. Did you really try to help Chloe? I did. I paid for 3 stays in rehab clinics. I offered her clean work several times, but the addiction was stronger. And why was she using my identity? Arthur sighed heavily, because she owed money to dangerous people, people who don't accept excuses. Using your identity was a way to hide. And you knew about this? I found out too late. When I did, I tried to convince her to stop, to seek official help. That was our last fight before the accident. Daniel watched the whole interaction, trying to decide if Arthur was genuine in his remorse or if he had hidden motives for getting involved. If I accept your offer, Daniel said, do you want some guarantee that our family situation won't be revealed? On the contrary, Arthur replied, I want you to resolve everything legally, for Isabella to officially reclaim her identity, for you to get married again as you should, for Emily to have a family registered in the records. And the problems with the insurance company, I will cover all the legal costs, expert lawyers, medical examinations, everything needed to prove it was a genuine error, not fraud. The offer seemed too good to be true, and Daniel knew that such offers always came with hidden costs that only appeared later. The meeting extended late into the night, with Arthur presenting detailed documents about his purchase proposal. Daniel analyzed each clause with suspicion, looking for hidden traps, but surprisingly, everything seemed transparent and favorable. There is only one condition I haven't mentioned yet, Arthur said, as they were finalizing the discussion. What is it? Daniel asked, already expecting the catch. I want Emily to know the truth about her mother, about Chloe, about the addiction, about how she was abandoned. When she grows up, I want her to understand that her mother wasn't a bad person, just a sick one. Isabella frowned. Why is that important to you? Because Chloe made me promise, shortly before the accident, that if anything happened to her, I would make sure Emily didn't grow up hating her. You promise a lot for a 4-year-old child, Thomas observed. I promise what's appropriate for her age. The rest, we will reveal gradually as she grows up. Daniel looked at Isabella, trying to read her feelings. What do you think? I think Emily has the right to know her true story, she replied after a moment of reflection, but at the right time, in the right way. So we have a deal? Arthur asked. Before Daniel could answer, his phone rang. It was the housekeeper, clearly agitated. Mr. Daniel, you need to come home immediately. Emily is very sick. Panic seized everyone in the room. They rushed to Daniel's house, where they found Emily with a high fever, vomiting, and in intense abdominal pain. How long has she been like this? Isabella asked, picking the girl up. It started 2 hours ago, the housekeeper replied. She had a normal dinner, played a bit, and suddenly started complaining of pain. Let's go to the hospital, Daniel said, grabbing his car keys. At the hospital, after 2 hours of tests, Dr. Foster appeared with a grave expression. Emily has appendicitis. She needs surgery immediately. Is it dangerous? Isabella asked, tears streaming down her face. It's a relatively simple surgery, but with small children there are always risks, especially since she's malnourished from the time she spent on the streets. Do whatever is necessary, Daniel said immediately. There's a problem, Dr. Foster continued. For an emergency surgery on a minor, we need authorization from the legal guardians. Do you have temporary guardianship documents? Daniel and Isabella looked at each other. The documentation was in process, but it hadn't been finalized yet. Not yet, Daniel admitted. Then we'll need to contact Child Protective Services for emergency authorization. That could take a few hours. A few hours she doesn't have, Isabella said desperately. It was at this moment that Arthur spoke up. Dr. Foster, I know the Smith family well. Can I sign as an emergency guardian? The doctor hesitated. You would have to prove kinship or legal guardianship. I have documents that show I was responsible for Chloe Smith in the last years of her life, Arthur said, taking papers from his wallet. As the mother's guardian, I can authorize medical treatment for the daughter in an emergency situation. Dr. Foster quickly reviewed the documents. It's irregular, but considering the urgency, do the surgery, Arthur said. I take full responsibility. During the 3 hours Emily was in the operating room, Daniel, Isabella, Thomas, and Arthur waited in silence in the hallway. It was during this wait that Daniel finally understood that Arthur was genuine in his desire to make up for the mistakes of the past. Why are you really doing all this? Daniel asked. Arthur was quiet for a long time before answering. Because when Chloe died, I thought I had lost my only chance at redemption. When I found out Isabella was alive and that Emily needed a family, I realized I had a second chance. A second chance for what? To prove that I can do the right thing, that I can use the money I earned wrongly to fix at least part of the harm I caused. Isabella, who was listening to the conversation, spoke up. Arthur, do you have a family of your own? No. The lifestyle I led for years pushed away everyone who cared about me. Now I have money, but I have no one to share it with. And you think helping us will fill that void? No, he replied honestly, but I think it's the first step to becoming a person I can respect. When Dr. Foster finally came out of the operating room, they all stood up anxiously. The surgery was successful, he announced with a smile. Emily is going to be fine. We managed to remove the appendix before it ruptured. The relief that washed over the group was palpable. Isabella collapsed in tears of gratitude, and Daniel felt as if he could breathe again for the first time in hours. When can we see her? Isabella asked. In a few hours, when she wakes up from the anesthesia. She'll need to stay in the hospital for 3 or 4 days. Over the next few days, as Emily recovered in the hospital, Daniel and Isabella took turns being by her side. It was during these vigils that they made the final decision about Arthur's proposal. We'll accept, Isabella said one early morning while watching Emily sleep peacefully. Not for the company, not for the money, but because we need stability to take care of her properly. Are you sure? This means I'll be working for someone who was once involved in trafficking. It means you'll be working for someone who is trying to change his life, just like me." "What do you mean?" "Daniel, I'm no longer the Isabella you knew. These 3 years have changed everything in me. If I can have a second chance, why can't Arthur have his?" The next morning, when Emily was awake and playing with the toys Arthur had brought, Daniel announced his decision. "I accept your proposal," he said, "but with conditions, which are: first, all employees keep their jobs. Second, any major decision about the company goes through me first. Third, if I discover any illegal activity, the deal is off immediately." "I accept all conditions," Arthur replied. "When can we make it official?" "After we resolve Isabella's legal situation," Daniel said. "She will officially reclaim her identity. We will get married again, and we will legally adopt Emily." "And the problems with the insurance company?" "My lawyers are already preparing the medical documentation to prove Isabella's state of amnesia during the 3 years. With the right witnesses and the proper reports, we should be able to characterize it as a medical error, not fraud." Emily, who was playing in her bed, looked at the adults around her. "Uncle Daniel, is Aunt Lucy going to be my real mum?" "She is, Princess," Daniel replied, taking her small hand. "And are you going to be my real dad?" "I am." "And Uncle Arthur, is he going to be in our family too?" The child's innocent question caught everyone by surprise. Arthur approached the bed. "I'm going to be your friend, Emily. Someone who will always make sure you have everything you need. Like an honorary uncle." "Exactly, like an honorary uncle." Emily smiled, satisfied with the explanation. "So now I have a big family. Dad, Mom, Grandpa Thomas, and honorary Uncle Arthur." As he watched Emily's genuine happiness, Daniel realized that his life had become something completely different from what he had imagined 3 years ago. It wasn't the life he had planned, but maybe it was exactly the life he needed. A month had passed since Emily's surgery, and preparations for legalizing Isabella's situation were underway. Arthur's lawyers had worked tirelessly to build a solid case, proving temporary amnesia, and the outlook was optimistic. But on a Tuesday morning, everything fell apart again. Daniel was in his office when Jacob burst through the door, his face pale and his hands trembling. "Daniel, we have a very serious problem," he said, quickly closing the door. "What is it now?" "And Beatrice Collins found out who Lucy really is." Daniel's world stopped. "What do you mean she found out?" "She did a deeper investigation into the documentation we submitted. She found out the records were forged." "How did she find out?" "Through cross-referencing with other clerks' offices. The seals were fake, the signatures didn't match. Daniel, she knows Lucy is actually Isabella Harrison." Daniel stood up abruptly, starting to pace. "Where is Beatrice now?" "On her way to Lucy's house with a court order for formal questioning." "And Emily? Where's Emily?" "At school, but Beatrice is going to pick her up shortly after." Daniel desperately called Isabella's phone, but no one answered. He called Thomas, and the old man answered with a worried voice. "Daniel, 2 social services cars arrived here 10 minutes ago. Lucy is being questioned, and there's an officer waiting to take Emily." "Where are you?" "At the neighbor's house, watching everything." "Daniel, they have official documentation. There's nothing we can do." Daniel hung up the phone and turned to Jacob. "Call Arthur. Tell him we need immediate legal help. Daniel, maybe it's time to accept that we've lost. If Beatrice found out the truth—" "No!" Daniel exploded. "I'm not losing Emily. I'm not letting them destroy our family when we finally manage to build one." He ran out of the office, driving at high speed to Emily's school. He arrived just as a social services van was parking in front of the building. Daniel ran inside the school, finding Emily in her classroom, completely oblivious to what was happening. The girl was drawing, focused on creating another of her family pictures. "Uncle Daniel," she exclaimed happily when she saw him, "look at the drawing I made." The drawing showed a house with a garden and 5 people holding hands: Daniel, Isabella, Emily, Thomas, and Arthur. "It's beautiful, Princess," he said, picking her up. "Let's go for a little ride." "But it's not time to go home yet," she protested. "We're leaving early today." Daniel carried Emily through the school corridors, trying to leave through the back door, but he found Beatrice Collins waiting for him. "Mr. Harrison," she said with authority, "I need to take Emily for an official interview." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that you submitted falsified documentation about the identity of her supposed aunt." Emily, who was in Daniel's arms, began to realize something was wrong. "Uncle Daniel, why is that lady talking like that?" "It's okay, Emily," he tried to reassure her, but his own voice trembled. "Mr. Harrison, don't make this harder than it has to be," Beatrice said. "The child needs to be placed in a temporary home while we investigate the situation." "She's already in a temporary home. With me. A home based on lies and false documents." At that moment, Arthur appeared in the school hallway, accompanied by 2 lawyers. "Beatrice," he said respectfully, "may I speak with you in private?" "Mr. Fisher, what are you doing here?" "I represent the interests of Emily Smith in this case." "Based on what?" Arthur presented an official document. "Based on the fact that I am officially her legal guardian, appointed by her mother before her passing." Beatrice examined the document with skepticism. "This document is from 3 years ago. Why is it only appearing now?" "Because I was out of the country on business and only recently learned of Emily's situation." One of the lawyers spoke up. "Ms. Collins, this document was registered at the competent office at the time. All seals and signatures are legitimate. And where were you for these 3 years while the child lived on the streets?" "As I said, out of the country. But now I'm here to assume my responsibilities." Daniel watched the whole interaction without fully understanding what was happening. Arthur had never mentioned having legal guardianship over Emily. "I need to verify the authenticity of these documents," Beatrice said. "Of course," the lawyer agreed. "In the meantime, the child remains with her current legal guardian." "And who would that be?" "Mr. Fisher temporarily transferred guardianship to Mr. Daniel Harrison while he resolved personal matters. We have all the necessary documentation." Beatrice looked suspiciously at the papers presented to her. This is all too convenient and too well organized to be true. "Ma'am, I suggest you verify the documentation through official channels before questioning its authenticity," the second lawyer said firmly. "Until then, the child stays where she is." After a tense 20-minute discussion, Beatrice agreed to verify the documents before taking any action. She left the school with a frustrated expression, clearly suspecting she was being manipulated, but unable to prove anything immediately. When they were alone, Daniel turned to Arthur. "How did you get guardianship documentation for Emily?" "Chloe really did appoint me as guardian before she passed," Arthur explained. "She was lucid enough in her final days to make some legal arrangements." "And why didn't you mention it before?" "Because I didn't want to take on the responsibility alone. I wanted you and Isabella to be Emily's parents. But when the situation got complicated, I realized I needed to use my legal rights to protect her." Emily, who had followed the whole conversation without understanding much, finally spoke up. "Uncle Daniel, am I going to have to leave?" "No, Princess," he replied, hugging her tightly. "You're going to stay with us." "And Aunt Lucy, is she going to stay too?" Daniel looked at Arthur, who nodded discreetly. "Yes, she's going to stay too." But when they returned home, they found a very different situation. Isabella was sitting in the living room with Thomas by her side, both with dejected expressions. "What happened?" Daniel asked. "Beatrice got a temporary court order," Thomas said. Isabella has 48 hours to officially present herself as Isabella Harrison and explain the circumstances of her disappearance. And if she doesn't, she will be considered a fugitive from justice for identity fraud. Isabella looked at Emily, who ran to hug her. There's no hiding anymore, Daniel. It's time to tell the whole truth. Does that mean you're going to officially reassume your identity? It means I'm going to admit who I am and face the consequences. And the financial problems, the insurance company, the company? Arthur said he will honor all the commitments he made, she replied, but I need to do the right thing regardless of the consequences. Emily looked from one adult to another, feeling the tension in the air. Aunt Lucy, are you going to have to leave? No, my dear, but I might have to change my name again. To Isabella? Yes. Can I call you Aunt Isabella then? You can call me anything you want. Then I'll call you Mom, Emily said with simplicity, because that's what you are to me. The child's innocence and determination deeply touched all the adults present. Regardless of the legal problems they would face, regardless of the financial challenges, they had become a real family. The day of the official hearing arrived on a sunny Friday morning. Isabella had spent the previous night sleepless, mentally preparing to tell her true story before the judge, the insurance company representatives, and all the authorities who now questioned her identity. Daniel found her sitting in the garden at home, watching Emily play with her dolls. The girl had set up a wedding for the toys, imitating what she had seen in the movies they watched together. "Are you ready?" Daniel asked softly, sitting next to Isabella on the garden bench. "I don't think I could ever be completely ready for this," she replied, "but yes, I'm prepared to tell the truth." "Are you sure this is what you want? We can still try other alternatives." Isabella shook her head. "Daniel, during these months living with you and Emily, I've learned something important about family and about truth. Our happiness can't be built on lies, even if they are well-intentioned lies." Emily ran up to them, holding a doll dressed as a bride. "Daddy Daniel, Mommy Isabella, do you want to be the witnesses at the pink doll's wedding?" The naturalness with which Emily called them Dad and Mom still moved Daniel deeply. "Of course, Princess, it would be an honor. And then will you get married for real too?" Daniel and Isabella looked at each other. It was a conversation they had been postponing, but one that needed to happen. "Emily," Isabella said affectionately, "after the important meeting we have today, we're going to talk about a lot of things, including our future as a family." "Okay," Emily agreed, returning to her dolls. 2 hours later, they were at the Willow Creek Courthouse. The room was full. Besides the judge, there were representatives from the insurance company, Beatrice Collins, Dr. Foster, Arthur with his lawyers, and even Jacob, who had shown up to take his own responsibilities. "Mrs. Isabella Harrison," the judge began, "you disappeared 3 years ago under mysterious circumstances, were officially declared deceased. An insurance claim was paid to your husband, and now you reappear with a false identity. How do you explain this situation?" Isabella stood up, took a deep breath, and began to tell her story as honestly as possible. "Your Honor, 3 years ago, I discovered that my twin sister, Chloe, was using my identity to escape debts related to drug addiction. When I confronted her about it, she begged me for help, saying that dangerous people were after her. And what did you do? I tried to help her. I offered money to pay off the debts, medical treatment, family support. But Chloe was too scared and said that only running away would solve the problem." Continue. "On the night of the accident, Chloe called me desperately, saying that armed men had shown up at the house where she was living. I left immediately to pick her up, but when I arrived at the meeting spot, she had already left, driving my car." Dr. Foster spoke up. "That explains why she was carrying Isabella's documents at the time of the accident." "Yes," Isabella continued. Chloe had taken my wallet along with the car keys. When I heard about the accident, I was devastated. But I also realized that if I showed up immediately, the men chasing Chloe might come after me too. So you decided to disappear? I decided to hide temporarily until I could better understand the situation, but the next day I had a minor accident on my way to the hospital to identify the body. I hit my head, and when I woke up, I couldn't remember who I was. The judge consulted the records. We have medical reports here confirming that you did indeed suffer a head trauma with subsequent amnesia. Yes, Your Honor. For 2 years, I lived as Lucy Ribeiro with no memory of my previous identity. It was only in the last few months, through contact with my husband and my niece, that the memories began to return. The insurance company representative spoke up. Your Honor, even considering the extenuating circumstances, the fact remains that a claim was paid without an actual death. I understand, said the judge. Mr. Harrison, how do you intend to resolve this matter? Daniel stood up. Your Honor, arrangements are already being made for the full repayment of the amount, with interest and correction. My partner, Arthur Fisher, will assume the financial responsibility for the payment. Arthur confirmed with a nod. And what about the falsification of documents to assume a false identity? Asked the judge. Your Honor, said one of Arthur's lawyers, our client was mentally incapacitated when she assumed the identity of Lucy Ribeiro. The subsequent forgeries were done by third parties trying to help her, without her knowledge or consent. Beatrice Collins spoke up. And the situation of the minor, Emily Smith? The judge consulted other documents. I have here the legal guardianship documentation presented by Mr. Arthur Fisher, which has been duly verified and confirmed as authentic. Your Honor, Arthur said, I would like to officially transfer the guardianship of Emily Smith to Daniel Harrison and Isabella Harrison, who have demonstrated the capacity and love to raise her properly. And the child, what are her wishes? To everyone's surprise, Emily was called to give her statement. At only 4 years old, she spoke with impressive clarity about her desire to continue living with Daniel and Isabella, whom she considered her true parents. After a 3-hour hearing, the judge retired to deliberate. When he returned an hour later, his expression was serious, but not severe. Considering all the circumstances presented, this court decides, first, the identity of Isabella Harrison is officially recognized, and the previous declaration of death is annulled. Second, there will be no criminal proceedings, considering the applicant's state of mental incapacity during the period in question. Third, the request to transfer guardianship of Emily Smith to the couple Daniel and Isabella Harrison is granted. Fourth, a period of 90 days is established for the full settlement of the insurance amount, as per the agreement. The relief that washed over everyone was immense. When they left the courthouse, Emily ran to hug Daniel and Isabella. Now can I call you Dad and Mom forever? She asked. Forever, Isabella confirmed, with tears of happiness in her eyes. 3 months later, in an intimate ceremony in their home garden, Daniel and Isabella got married again. Emily was the flower girl. Thomas walked Isabella down the aisle. Arthur was Daniel's best man. And even Jacob, who had completed his community service sentence, was present. During the exchange of vows, Daniel looked at the woman he had lost and found again in a completely new way. Isabella, when we first married, I promised to love you forever. Today I promise to love every version of you, Isabella, Lucy, mother, wife, because I've learned that true love isn't about keeping people the same, but about growing together through the changes. Isabella held his hands firmly. Daniel, you taught me that family isn't just about blood or origin, but about daily choice and commitment. I choose you every day. I choose our daughter every day. I choose our family every day. Emily, watching closely, clapped enthusiastically. "Now you're married again, and I have a complete family." At night, after all the guests had left and Emily was asleep, Daniel and Isabella sat in the garden where it had all begun months ago. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked. "About everything we went through, all the complications?" "None," she replied without hesitation. "If I hadn't gone through all of this, I never would have become the person I am today. I never would have learned to be a mother, never would have discovered my own strength." And Emily changed everything for us, didn't she? Completely. She taught us that family is about unconditional love, not about perfection or planning. As they talked, they saw Arthur walking through the garden, checking that everything was in order before leaving. "Arthur," Daniel called, "thank you for everything." "Thank you for giving me a family again," he replied, "even if it's as an honorary uncle." "You'll always have a place here with us," Isabella said. "Emily considers you family, and that's what matters." 6 months later, on a sunny morning, Emily was playing in the garden when she ran into the house, shouting excitedly, "Dad! Mom! Come and see!" They ran to the garden and found Emily pointing to a tree where a bird had built its nest. "Look, the mommy bird had babies. Now she has a family too, just like us." Daniel and Isabella looked at each other and smiled, remembering how it all began with an abandoned girl and a crumpled photo. Now, a year later, they were a complete family. Not perfect, not without complications, but built on genuine love, second chances, and the understanding that sometimes life gives us exactly what we need, even when it's not what we planned. Emily drew one last picture that day, a big house with a garden, 4 people holding hands, and in the sky, a bright star that she said represented her mother Chloe, watching over them from wherever she was. It was the perfect image of a family that had found its way through pain to happiness, proving that sometimes the best stories begin in the most difficult moments. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.